Hi there. Thanks for tuning in. My name's Odell. For the longest time, honestly, for most of my adult life, I thought keeping my mouth shut was the price I had to pay for family peace. I guess I figured silence was easier than confrontation, especially in a family like mine, built on appearances. But then came the night they set my place at the dinner table, not with the usual embroidered linen napkin like everyone else, but with a cheap, flimsy paper one. That little square of paper told me everything I needed to know. And what started right there, in that quiet moment of being erased, well, it changed the entire course of my life. If you've ever poured your heart into something, only to be told it wasn't enough, or worse, wasn't even yours, stick with me for a bit. You might recognize something in this story. It was one of those Sunday dinners. You know the kind. The ones that are supposed to feel like tradition, like connection, but mostly feel like an obligation. My parents' house, the big mahogany table gleaming under the chandelier, the smell of roasted chicken heavy in the air. Everything was perfect, meticulously arranged. My father, Richard, sat at the head, holding court as usual. My mother fluttered around, making sure his water glass was always full. My sister, Claire, she was seated to my father's right, basking in the glow, laughing a little too loudly at one of his pronouncements. And then there was my place setting, between my mother and an empty chair meant for some guest who hadn't shown up. The usual heavy silverware, the polished water goblet, the china plate with its familiar gold rim. But tucked beside the fork where my heavy cream-colored linen napkin embroidered with a subtle W for Whitmore should have been, there was this paper napkin. The kind you get at a cheap diner. Thin, slightly rough, folded into a clumsy triangle. I just stared at it for a second. It felt like a physical blow, but silent, invisible. I looked around the table. My father had his linen napkin, my mother hers. Claire was dabbing delicately at her lips with hers. Everyone else, aunts, uncles, whoever was there that night, they all had the proper napkins. Just me. The paper one. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't an accident. You don't accidentally forget one napkin out of 8 or 10 when you're setting a formal table like my mother always did. This was a message. Subtle, deniable, but crystal clear. You're not quite one of us. You're temporary, disposable, an afterthought. I didn't say a word. I didn't gasp or point it out or demand an explanation. Years of practice had taught me that showing hurt in my family was like bleeding in shark-infested waters. It only invited more attack, thinly veiled as concern or tough love. So I just picked up the paper napkin. I unfolded it slowly, deliberately, felt its flimsy texture between my fingers, and I placed it in my lap. Throughout dinner, I watched them, listened to the clinking of forks on china, the rise and fall of conversation, mostly about Claire's latest brilliant move at the family logistics company, Whitmore Enterprises, or my father's expansion plans. I watched Claire preen under the praise, shooting me these little sideways glances, pity mixed with something like triumph. I saw my father lean back, satisfied, talking about legacy and strength, never once meeting my eye for more than a fleeting second. My mother, she just kept refilling glasses, her smile tight, avoiding the sight of that paper napkin in my lap as if it might burn her. The hurt was there. Oh yeah, a cold, hard knot forming in my stomach. It wasn't just about a napkin, obviously. It was about everything it represented. Years of being minimized, of having my ideas brushed aside or worse, adopted by Claire and presented as her own genius strokes weeks later. Years of being the other daughter, the quiet one, the one who wasn't quite Whitmore material. But underneath the hurt, something else was stirring, a slow, simmering heat. It wasn't explosive anger. It was colder than that. It was indignation, a profound sense of injustice. They thought they could erase me with a piece of paper? Fine. Let them think that. Let them underestimate me. Let them keep their embroidered napkins and their self-congratulatory bubble. I sat there, ate my chicken, nodded politely, and inside a decision began to solidify. I wouldn't fight them on their terms anymore. I wouldn't try to win their approval or correct the record. No. I would build something else. Something so real, so substantial that they wouldn't be able to ignore it, dismiss it, or replace it with a flimsy substitute. They'd left me a paper napkin? Fine. I decided right then and there I would build an empire on it. That paper napkin, it wasn't the start, not really. It was more like the final punctuation mark on a story that had been writing itself for years. Growing up Whitmore meant growing up in a pressure cooker disguised as a Norman Rockwell painting. Success wasn't just encouraged, it was the only acceptable currency. And my father, Richard Whitmore, he was the banker, deciding who had value and who didn't. My mother enabled it, smoothing over the cracks, always prioritizing his needs, his image. And Claire, my older sister Claire, she learned early on how to play the game, how to shine, how to take. I was different, quieter, more observant. I liked understanding how things worked, the mechanics behind the facade. While Claire was charming clients' wives at company picnics, I was figuring out inefficiencies in our warehouse dispatch system. While she was practicing her golf swing with Dad, I was sketching out ideas for optimizing delivery routes using predictive algorithms. Stuff I was learning in my college courses, things I thought could genuinely help the family business. Whitmore Enterprises. I remember one time, I must have been maybe 21, 22. I'd spent weeks developing a detailed proposal for integrating GPS tracking with real-time inventory management. It wasn't just a vague idea. I had flowcharts, cost projections, potential ROI calculations. I was genuinely excited about it. I finally got the nerve to present it to my father during one of our rare one-on-one moments usually reserved for lectures about my lack of executive presence. He listened, or pretended to listen, flipping through the pages with this impatient air. His eyes glazed over. When I finished, feeling breathless and hopeful, he just handed the folder back to me. He patted my shoulder, a gesture that always felt more dismissive than affectionate. "Interesting, Odell," he said, his voice lacking any actual interest. "Good theoretical exercise. But logistics is about relationships, grit. Not diagrams, grit." That was one of his favorite words, usually aimed at me. I felt myself shrink. That familiar cold wave of disappointment washed over me. I mumbled an okay, gathered my papers, and retreated. 2 months later, at the quarterly strategy meeting, which I wasn't invited to, of course, Claire presented a bold new initiative: real-time tracking, integrated inventory. Sound familiar? She didn't have the technical depth I did. Her presentation was all gloss and buzzwords, but she delivered it with that signature Whitmore confidence. Dad beamed. He called it game-changing, praised Claire's innate business savvy, her vision. He conveniently forgot my earlier proposal, or maybe just chose to. When I later tried to gently, carefully remind him, just hoping for a little acknowledgement, he waved me off. "Don't be petty, Odell." Claire took a concept and made it actionable. That's leadership. That wasn't the only time. Little ideas, big ideas, suggestions for process improvements, market analyses I'd shared, they'd often resurface weeks or months later, polished and presented by Claire, always to rapturous applause from Dad. And Claire, she never once gave credit. She just smiled that bright, empty smile. Sometimes she'd even offer me a sympathetic look later, like, "Tough break, kiddo." It was maddening. Soul-crushing, honestly. For years, I tried. I tried speaking up, louder sometimes. I tried documenting everything. I tried appealing to my mother, who just wrung her hands and said, "Don't make waves, dear. Your father and sister, they just operate at a different level." Different level, right? The pain of it settles deep in your bones after a while. It's not just frustration. It's this insidious feeling of being invisible, of your worth being constantly questioned, negated. You start to wonder if they're right. Maybe you are just background noise. But that night, with the paper napkin sitting in my lap, something shifted permanently. The pain was still there, but it wasn't passive anymore. It crystallized into something hard, something focused. I looked at Claire, laughing, soaking up the adoration. I looked at my father, oblivious in his certainty, and I made a vow, not out loud, just a quiet promise to myself, echoing in the space where my self-respect used to be eroded. I would never again try to correct their narrative. I would never again ask for credit or acknowledgement from them. Let them have their story, the one where Claire was the brilliant heir and I was the spare part. I wouldn't fight for a place in their story anymore. I would write my own, and I would build it brick by silent brick, so solid, so undeniable, that one day they wouldn't be able to ignore it. They wouldn't be able to erase it. They wouldn't even realize they were standing on the foundation I laid until it was too late. The spare child? Fine. Spares have a way of becoming essential when the main parts fail. And I knew, deep down, their system, built on ego and exclusion, was destined to fail. The day after that dinner, the sting of the paper napkin still fresh, I didn't wallow. I acted. I took a small portion of the inheritance my grandmother, my mother's mother, a woman who always saw me, truly saw me, had left me years before, money I'd carefully guarded. I registered a holding company. Something anonymous, generic, something that wouldn't trace back to Odell Whitmore. Let's call it Keystone Holdings. Then I rented a tiny, windowless office space in a nondescript building across town. Just big enough for a desk, a chair, and a powerful computer. That little room became my sanctuary, my laboratory. While Whitmore Enterprises was busy celebrating Claire's latest triumph, probably my repurposed idea from 6 months ago, I was working. 12, 14, 16 hours a day. My background wasn't just theoretical anymore. I'd finished my degree, specialized in logistics technology and systems management. I saw the gaps in the industry, the inefficiencies that companies like my father's exploited or simply ignored. I saw how technology could streamline things, create transparency, empower smaller players. That became my focus, not just building a company, but building the right kind of company. I started small, developing a niche software solution for optimizing last-mile delivery routes for small independent retailers. The kind of businesses the big players like Whitmore Enterprises barely noticed. It was painstaking work, coding, debugging, testing, refining, pitching to skeptical small business owners who were wary of new tech and tight on cash. I remember the day I signed my first client, a local artisanal bakery struggling with delivering their fresh bread across the city efficiently. The contract was tiny, barely enough to cover my server costs for a few months. But holding that signed piece of paper, oh man, it felt monumental. It wasn't just a client, it was proof. Proof that I could build something real, something valuable, entirely on my own merit. I didn't celebrate wildly. I just sat there in my little office, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, and felt this quiet, profound sense of beginning. A flicker of hope that felt earned. From there, it was slow, steady growth. One client became 3, 3 became 10. I hired my first employee, a sharp young programmer named Ben, who didn't care about my last name, only about the code. Then another. We kept our heads down. We focused on delivering exceptional results, building a reputation for reliability and innovation, all under the Keystone Holdings banner. No flashy marketing, no big press releases, just word-of-mouth referrals. One satisfied customer leading to the next. My strategy was always long-term. It wasn't just about building a successful tech company in isolation. It was about understanding the ecosystem. Whitmore Enterprises, like many legacy logistics giants, relied on a complex web of smaller, third-party contractors, trucking companies, warehousing partners. Their grit often translated to squeezing margins, exploiting dependencies. I saw an opportunity there. Keystone Holdings started developing solutions not just for retailers, but for those very third-party logistics providers. Software that helped them become more efficient, more competitive. Tools that gave them better visibility, better negotiating power. And quietly, strategically, Keystone started investing. Taking small equity stakes in some of these key partners. Acquiring a small, struggling regional warehouse here, a specialized trucking firm there, always through Keystone, always under the radar. My family, they remained blissfully unaware. To them, I was still just Odell, working on some little computer thing. They'd ask vaguely about it at obligatory family gatherings, their eyes glazing over before I could even explain. Claire once patronizingly offered to introduce me to some people if my little project ever needed real investment. I just smiled politely and declined. There were times, of course, when doubt crept in. Late nights staring at spreadsheets, facing unexpected setbacks, feeling the sheer weight of the ambition I'd set for myself. Was I crazy? Was this elaborate, silent game worth the isolation? But then I'd remember that paper napkin. I'd remember the sting of being erased, and the resolve would harden again. I wasn't just building a company. I was laying the groundwork. Stone by quiet stone, I was building the foundation beneath their feet, a foundation they didn't even know existed. A foundation that, one day, would give me control, not just of my own destiny, but of the very ground they walked on. It wasn't about revenge in the fiery, destructive sense. It was about balance, about creating a reality so undeniable that their carefully constructed narrative would simply crumble. The resilience wasn't loud. It was the steady, quiet hum of servers in my office, the persistent tap of keys, the slow, deliberate accumulation of power, unseen and underestimated, just the way I wanted it. Years passed. Keystone Holdings grew, slowly, steadily, like a vine winding its way through the established structures of the logistics world. We weren't a household name, but within certain crucial industry circles, we were becoming indispensable. Our software was managing fleets, optimizing warehouses, connecting shippers and carriers in ways that the old guard, including Whitmore Enterprises, hadn't quite grasped yet. We were the quiet engine humming beneath the surface. And my family, they remained oblivious, dismissive, trapped in their own echo chamber. The invitations to Sunday dinners continued, though I attended less frequently, always pleading work. When I did go, the dynamic was depressingly unchanged. Claire was now executive vice president at Whitmore Enterprises, her ascent fueled by carefully managed PR and, I suspected, more than a few of my long-forgotten ideas. My father lauded her every move, seeing her as the embodiment of his legacy. I tried occasionally to bridge the gap, gently mentioning a significant milestone Keystone had achieved, landing a major national contract, acquiring a key piece of infrastructure. Their reactions were always lukewarm, bordering on pitying. "Oh, that's nice, dear," my mother would murmur, quickly changing the subject. My father would offer a tight smile. "Good, good, keep at it," as if I were still tinkering with a high school science project. The lowest point came during Whitmore Enterprises' 75th anniversary gala, a huge, lavish affair at a downtown hotel ballroom, black tie, champagne flowing, a string quartet playing Vivaldi. I went, mostly out of a lingering sense of familial duty, and maybe a morbid curiosity to see their self-congratulatory spectacle up close. They had this elaborate multimedia presentation showcasing the company's history. Glossy photos, archival footage, soaring music. It traced the lineage from my grandfather, the founder, to my father, the expander, and then to Claire, the future. They highlighted key moments, innovations, growth periods, and I watched, standing near the back, as the narrative completely erased any contribution I might have made in my younger years, before the stolen ideas, before the paper napkin. Early projects I'd actually helped with, groundwork I'd laid, it was either glossed over or implicitly credited to Claire's burgeoning influence even back then. It was like I'd never existed within those walls. Later, during a lull in the programmed back-patting, my father found me nursing a glass of sparkling water by the dessert table. He put a heavy hand on my shoulder. He looked almost magnanimous, flushed with success and champagne. "Quite a night, eh?" he said, gesturing around the opulent room. "This is what happens when you build something real, Odell, something lasting." He paused, looking me up and down, taking in my simple black dress amidst the sequins and designer labels. Then came the kicker. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a confidential, almost pitying tone. "Listen, I know your tech thing is important to you, and that's fine. Keep trying, keep working hard. Maybe one day you'll understand what it takes to build something on this scale." He squeezed my shoulder again, a gesture meant to be encouraging, but landing like a ton of bricks. Keep trying, as if everything I had built, silently, painstakingly, was nothing. As if Keystone, which by then was quietly managing logistics networks that dwarfed some of Whitmore's own regional operations, was just a hobby. The bitterness rose in my throat, sharp and acidic. The frustration wasn't just simmering anymore, it was burning. That cold wall of family, impenetrable and unseeing, felt higher and colder than ever. I didn't argue, I didn't defend myself. I just offered a tight, polite smile. "Thanks, Dad." It's quite an evening. Inside, though, the last vestiges of hope for any kind of familial understanding, any recognition on their terms, finally died. Had told me to keep trying. Oh, I would, but not in the way he imagined. The gala wasn't just a celebration of their success. It became the catalyst for my next phase. The phase where silence stopped being a shield and started becoming a weapon. The need for justice, for the truth to have its day, wasn't just a desire anymore. It felt like a necessity. A debt owed to that younger version of myself whose ideas were dismissed, whose contributions were erased. It was time to stop building beside them and start dismantling their foundation. Quietly, of course. The shift was internal at first. The burning frustration from the gala didn't erupt outwards. It channeled itself into pure, cold focus. My work at Keystone Holdings took on a new intensity, a sharper edge. The long-term strategy, which had always been simmering on the back burner, moved to the forefront. It was time to stop just acquiring pieces around Whitmore Enterprises. It was time to aim for the heart. My anonymity, maintained through Keystone Holdings and a series of carefully structured shell corporations, was my greatest asset. While my family saw Odell, the quiet daughter with the little computer thing, the industry saw Keystone, a growing force, an innovator, an investor. They didn't connect the two, nobody did. I began by leveraging the network I'd built. The smaller logistics firms, the warehouses, the trucking companies where Keystone held equity or whose operations relied heavily on our software, they became my eyes and ears. Not in a nefarious way initially. It started with data. Our systems naturally gathered operational data, performance metrics, efficiency reports. Analyzing this data, aggregated and anonymized, gave me an unparalleled view of the logistics ecosystem, including the pressure points and vulnerabilities within Whitmore Enterprises' network. Then came the audits. Using Keystone's position as a key technology partner and investor in several companies that contracted with Whitmore, I initiated thorough, seemingly routine performance and financial audits within those partner companies. Officially, it was about ensuring contractual compliance, optimizing shared resources. Unofficially, it allowed me access to invoices, shipping manifests, communication logs, payment records, all detailing interactions with Whitmore Enterprises. Slowly, carefully, patterns began to emerge. Discrepancies, inflated charges, preferential treatment given to vendors connected to my father or sister, even when their performance lagged, contracts awarded without proper bidding processes, evidence of kickbacks cleverly disguised. Simultaneously, I started looking inside Whitmore Enterprises. This was trickier, requiring more subtlety. Keystone began strategically headhunting mid-level managers and analysts from Whitmore, people who might have felt overlooked or disillusioned by the nepotism favoring Claire and her cronies. We offered them better opportunities, better compensation, a culture that valued merit. Some came over, and some, grateful for the escape, brought knowledge with them. Not confidential data. I was careful about legal lines, but institutional knowledge. Understanding the internal politics, the workflows, the frustrations simmering beneath the surface among the rank-and-file employees. This led to the next step, creating a secure, anonymous channel for current Whitmore employees to report grievances. Using a third-party ethics platform, marketed subtly through industry forums and targeted online ads, we offered a place for people to voice concerns about workplace discrimination, harassment, unfair practices, and unethical behavior within Whitmore Enterprises, completely confidentially. The dam didn't break overnight, but gradually stories started trickling in. Stories confirming the nepotism. Claire promoting unqualified friends, bypassing more deserving colleagues. Stories of my father using company resources for personal projects, blurring the lines between corporate and private expenses. Tales of a toxic culture where loyalty to the Whitmore name trumped competence and fairness. Each anonymous report was meticulously logged, cross-referenced where possible with the audit findings from partner companies. I wasn't just collecting anecdotes, I was building a case, documented, verifiable evidence. All this time, I maintained the facade, attended the occasional obligatory family function, smiled politely, listened to Claire boast about her latest strategic win, endured my father's pronouncements about integrity and hard work. The duality was exhausting sometimes. Sitting across the dinner table, knowing the evidence accumulating on my secure servers, feeling the weight of the inevitable collision course, it required a level of compartmentalization I hadn't known I possessed. My silence, once a shield born of hurt, had transformed. Now it was strategic. It was deliberate. Every piece of evidence gathered, every share of Whitmore stock, quietly acquired on the open market through Keystone's investment arms, every disgruntled employee's story, they were all threads being woven into a net that was slowly, inexorably tightening around the foundations of my family's empire. The tension was palpable, at least to me, like the deep, quiet hum before an earthquake. They couldn't hear it yet, but I could feel the ground beginning to tremble. Anticipation wasn't quite the right word. It was a sense of impending calibration, a necessary rebalancing that was long, long overdue. The day arrived with a deceptive calmness. It was a scheduled quarterly board meeting for Whitmore Enterprises, held in the imposing, wood-paneled boardroom on the top floor of their corporate headquarters. I wasn't on the board naturally. Never invited, never considered. But Keystone Holdings, through its accumulated shares acquired patiently over years, now controlled a significant voting bloc. Enough to demand certain agenda items be addressed. Enough to have representatives present. I wasn't there physically myself, not yet. My lead counsel, Sarah Jenkins, sharp, unflappable, and fully briefed, represented Keystone's interests. I was connected remotely, watching via a secure video feed, my presence known only to Sarah and the meeting chair. The meeting started predictably. My father, Richard, as chairman, opened with his usual blend of booming confidence and vague pronouncements about market conditions. Claire, sitting beside him, presented the quarterly results with polished slides and carefully curated success stories, glossing over any concerning metrics. There was an air of routine, perhaps a slight undercurrent of tension from the ongoing low-level rumors sparked by our anonymous grievance platform, but nothing that seemed to truly alarm them. They controlled the board, or so they thought. Most members were longtime allies, beneficiaries of my father's patronage. Then Sarah, representing Keystone, calmly requested the floor to discuss the findings of the recent third-party audits and the independent ethics investigation, the results of which had been distributed to board members just 24 hours prior, causing a ripple of unease. My father bristled slightly. Ms. Jenkins, while we appreciate Keystone's diligence as a significant shareholder, he began, his tone patronizing, I assure you, management has these matters well in hand. Perhaps a separate discussion would be more appropriate. Sarah didn't flinch. Mr. Whitmore, she said, her voice steady and clear, cutting through his attempt to deflect. The findings are significant and require the board's immediate attention. They indicate systemic issues, financial irregularities, breaches of fiduciary duty, and a pattern of discriminatory practices directly linked to senior management. The room grew quiet. Board members shifted uncomfortably. Claire shot Sarah a look that could curdle milk. My father's face began to flush. Sarah proceeded, calmly, methodically, to summarize the key findings. The nepotism in Claire's division, backed by internal emails and HR complaints. The misuse of company funds traced directly to my father, supported by audited financial records. The pattern of contracts awarded unfairly, documented through the partner company audits. She didn't raise her voice. She simply presented the facts, referencing the detailed reports they'd received. My father started to bluster. This is outrageous, fabricated nonsense. A clear attempt by an outside investor to destabilize this company. Claire jumped in, her voice sharp with indignation. These are lies. Disgruntled employees. We run this company with integrity. Sarah let them finish. Then she paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the air. Actually, she said, her gaze sweeping across the stunned board members, the investor raising these concerns isn't exactly an outsider. Keystone Holdings is merely the investment vehicle. The beneficial owner, the individual who has patiently gathered this information and now holds controlling interest in Whitmore Enterprises, is Odell Whitmore. Silence. Absolute, deafening silence. I watched on my screen as my father's jaw literally dropped. His face went from red to pale white. Claire looked like she'd been struck by lightning, her eyes wide with disbelief, then flashing with fury, searching the room as if expecting me to materialize from the walls. The other board members looked utterly bewildered, glancing between my father, Claire, and Sarah. Sarah continued, her voice retaining its calm authority. Ms. Whitmore has been aware of these issues for a considerable time. She attempted internal channels years ago to no avail. The evidence presented today is comprehensive and undeniable. In light of these findings, and exercising her rights as the majority shareholder, Ms. Whitmore demands immediate resignation of Richard Whitmore as chairman and CEO and Claire Whitmore as executive vice president, effective immediately. Chaos erupted, shouting, accusations, threats. My father lunged towards Sarah, restrained by another board member. Claire was on her feet, yelling about betrayal, about theft, but the evidence was laid bare. The numbers didn't lie. The documents were irrefutable. The other board members, seeing the undeniable proof and realizing where the power now truly resided, began to distance themselves from the Whitmores. A motion was called. The vote was swift, brutal. The board, swayed by the evidence and the new power dynamic, overwhelmingly voted in favor of accepting the resignations. I watched it all unfold, my heart pounding, but my breathing steady. There was no elation, no desire to gloat, just a profound, quiet sense of arrival, like reaching the end of a long, arduous climb. The scales so unbalanced for so long had finally been righted. The paper napkin, the dismissal, the erasure, they had led to this moment. The moment the power shifted, not with a bang, but with the quiet, irrefutable weight of truth. My father and sister were escorted from the room, their faces masks of rage and disbelief. The empire they thought was theirs had crumbled, not because of an outside attack, but because of the rot within, finally exposed by the one they never saw coming. My self-worth wasn't something they could grant or deny anymore. I had built it myself, and now I had reclaimed my place. Not just in the company, but in my own story. The fallout was noisy, predictably noisy. My father and Claire didn't go quietly into the night. Almost immediately, they launched a public relations offensive. Interviews with sympathetic journalists, carefully crafted statements painting themselves as victims of a hostile takeover, a ruthless coup orchestrated by a jealous, estranged family member, me. They spoke of loyalty betrayed, of years of hard work undermined by misunderstandings and out-of-context information. They tried to spin the narrative, relying on the old Whitmore charm and perceived authority. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old anxiety. Would people believe them? Would the carefully constructed case crumble under the weight of their public denials? But I held firm to the strategy that had brought me this far: my silence. I issued one single, brief statement through Keystone Holdings, confirming the leadership change was based on thorough investigations and aimed at ensuring the company's long-term health and ethical governance. Then, I said nothing more publicly. I didn't engage in the he said, she said. I didn't leak damaging emails or relish their downfall in the press. I simply let the truth do the talking. And you know what? It did. Almost immediately after my father and Claire started their media tour, something else began to happen. The former employees, the ones who had contributed to the anonymous grievance platform, started finding their voices publicly. Emboldened by the change in leadership, seeing that speaking out no longer meant career suicide, they began to share their stories. Not anonymously anymore. An article appeared in a major business journal detailing specific instances of Claire's discriminatory management practices, corroborated by named sources. A group of mid-level managers published an open letter outlining the toxic, fear-based culture under my father's reign. Whistleblowers came forward with documentation, the receipts, as they say, backing up the claims of financial impropriety. Social media lit up with former Whitmore employees sharing their experiences, validating the reasons for the leadership change. It was like a dam breaking. The narrative my father and Claire were trying so hard to control was completely overwhelmed by this wave of authentic, corroborated testimony from the people who had actually lived it. Their excuses sounded hollow, their denials flimsy, in the face of so many consistent, detailed accounts. Watching it unfold felt validating and profoundly relieving. The burden wasn't just mine anymore. The truth wasn't just my perception. It was a shared reality, finally seeing the light of day. My silence wasn't weakness. It was a space that allowed other, more powerful voices to emerge. It allowed the facts, the evidence painstakingly gathered, to resonate without being drowned out by personal recriminations. There was a certain peace in that, a justified peace. The world was seeing the reality I had lived with for years, the reality obscured by the shiny Whitmore facade. The truth, it turned out, echoed much louder than their excuses ever could. And I didn't have to shout to make it heard. I just had to create the conditions for it to emerge on its own. Taking the helm of Whitmore Enterprises, soon rebranded, merging the best of its legacy infrastructure with Keystone's innovative technology, wasn't just about correcting past wrongs. It was about building something fundamentally different, something better. The first order of business was culture. We dismantled the old hierarchical structure, the one built on fear and favor. We implemented transparent promotion processes based on merit, not connections. We established clear ethical guidelines and robust reporting mechanisms that were actually listened to. We invested in employee training and development, making people feel valued, not disposable. It wasn't about tearing everything down. It was about rebuilding on a foundation of respect, fairness, and collaboration. The change wasn't instantaneous, of course. Healing a toxic workplace takes time, effort, consistency. But gradually you could feel the shift. The tension eased. People started smiling more in the hallways. Ideas flowed more freely. There was a sense of shared purpose emerging, a feeling that we were building something worthwhile together. One afternoon, a few months into the transition, I was walking through the main operations floor. A young woman, maybe in her late 20s, working as a logistics coordinator, hesitantly approached me. Her name was Maya. "Miss Whitmore?" she began, a little nervously. I just wanted to say thank you." I stopped, genuinely curious. "For what, Maya?" "For everything," she said, gesturing vaguely around the bustling office. Before it felt like you had to know the right people or just keep your head down. I had ideas, suggestions, but I never felt like anyone would listen. Now, she took a breath, her eyes meeting mine directly. "Now, I feel like my work actually matters, like I matter. My team leader actually asked for my input on the new routing software last week, and they used one of my suggestions." A small, genuine smile spread across her face. "It just feels different, better." Listening to her, seeing the quiet confidence in her eyes, the relief, oh man, it hit me right in the chest, because I saw myself in her. The younger me sketching out ideas, hoping someone would see their value, only to be dismissed or ignored. That feeling of finally being seen, finally being heard. I knew exactly what that meant. "Thank you for telling me that, Maya," I said, my voice maybe a little thicker than usual. "That's what we're aiming for. Keep sharing those ideas. They matter." Her smile widened. "I will. Thank you." As she walked away, back to her workstation, I stood there for a moment. That brief exchange meant more to me than any stock valuation or industry award. It was the real measure of success. Building a place where talent could thrive, where voices like Maya's, voices like mine once was, wouldn't be silenced or overlooked. Later that week, I moved into the CEO's office, the one that had been my father's for decades. We'd renovated it, replaced the dark, heavy wood with lighter tones, more glass, plants. My name was on the door. Odell Whitmore, not hidden behind Keystone Holdings, not an anonymous force, just me. Sitting at that desk looking out over the city, it wasn't a feeling of triumph over my family. The anger, the bitterness, they had largely faded, replaced by something quieter, more profound. It was a sense of wholeness, a sense of having finally taken my rightful place, not by demanding it, but by building it. From the ground up, from that first ignored idea, from that dismissive paper napkin, I had built not just a company, but a space where I belonged, where fairness wasn't just a concept, but the operating principle. I hadn't just sought justice for myself, I tried to build it for everyone within those walls. And in doing so, I finally found the center of my own story. Not erased, not dismissed, just present, and ready for the next chapter. So that's my story, or at least a big piece of it. What I learned through it all is that you don't always need a loud voice to make yourself heard. Sometimes the quiet, steady work of building something true, something valuable, speaks volumes all on its own. You don't have to fight on someone else's terms or waste your energy trying to change minds that are determined to misunderstand you. Just keep building. Keep laying those stones one by one. Eventually, the structure you create becomes undeniable. The world, or at least the parts of it that matter, will have no choice but to notice. And more importantly, you will know its worth. If any part of this resonated with you, if you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or had to fight to reclaim your own narrative, I'd be honored if you shared a piece of your own experience in the comments below. I truly do read them, and I find so much strength in knowing we're not alone in these journeys. And if you see yourself reflected somewhere in these stories of quiet resilience and eventual justice, maybe hit that subscribe button. We can keep walking this path, sharing these stories together. Finally, you can also support the channel directly through the Super Thanks button below this video. Every little bit helps us keep bringing these stories to light. And sometimes giving back even in small ways, can be its own form of healing too. Thanks so much for listening. Take care of yourselves.